She was just a girl, sitting quietly at her desk, doing nothing more than trying to blend into the background. She wasn't loud. She wasn't disruptive. She wasn't causing trouble. And yet, in a matter of seconds, her entire world shifted. A figure of authority stormed into the classroom, her voice sharp, her presence overwhelming. At first, no one understood why. No one could imagine that the target of her rage would be the quietest person in the room. But when the officer's boot struck Amara's chair, struck her, it wasn't just an attack on one girl. It was an attack on dignity, on safety, on the fragile hope that children could ever feel protected in spaces meant to nurture them. What unfolded next wasn't just shocking. It was a reminder of how deeply prejudice hides, ready to surface when power goes unchecked. This wasn't just about Amara. It was about every child who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, or less than human. And the question now was simple but chilling. How far would this officer go, and what would happen when Amara's mother arrived? Stay with this story, because what comes next will leave you breathless. And if you believe stories like these matter, don't just watch, comment, share, and subscribe. Because silence only helps the cycle continue. Amara's life, until that day, was painfully ordinary. Ordinary in the kind of way that children often take for granted and parents silently treasure. She was 15 years old, a quiet, reserved girl with a deep love for sketching in the margins of her notebooks. Her days at school were predictable. Classes, whispered conversations with her closest friend, and the comfort of blending into the background where no one paid her much attention. Teachers described her as polite, respectful, even shy. She wasn't the type to raise her hand often or speak out in front of the class, but when she did, her words carried thoughtfulness beyond her years. For Amara, school was supposed to be a refuge, a place where she could dream of her future. Free from the noise of the outside world, her mother, Angela, worked long shifts in government service, a job that kept her away but also one that allowed her to provide stability for her daughter. Angela always told Amara that strength wasn't just about fighting back. It was about standing tall, even when the world tried to push you down. And so Amara believed that if she stayed quiet, if she kept her head low, if she followed every rule, then maybe, just maybe, life would leave her untouched. But that morning, something felt different. The air in the school hallways seemed heavier. The whispers among students hinted at tension none of them could name. Amara couldn't know it yet, but her life was about to shift from ordinary to unforgettable, and the girl who never wanted attention was about to become the center of a storm that would shake everyone around her. The very place that was meant to shelter her would become the setting for a lesson in prejudice, power, and survival. And as she adjusted her books that morning, unaware of what was to come, she had no idea that her quiet existence was about to collide with one woman's rage, and the truth that silence, no matter how deep, could never protect her. It started with a look, sharp, cutting, almost predatory. Amara had felt it before, that sting of being watched for no reason. But this time it was different. The officer patrolling the halls that day had fixed her eyes on her like she was a problem waiting to be solved, a threat that didn't exist but had already been imagined. Amara shifted in her seat, trying to disappear into the rows of desks, but the sound of heavy boots striking the tile grew louder, closer. And then came the voice, cold, demanding, filled with the weight of someone who believed their authority was absolute. Students turned their heads, whispers darting across the room. Why her? Why now? The officer's accusations didn't make sense. Amara hadn't spoken out of turn, hadn't broken a rule, hadn't done anything. But in the eyes of prejudice, innocence doesn't matter. Skin color becomes justification. Silence becomes defiance. Presence alone becomes a crime. Before she could even process what was happening, the officer's hand was on her desk, the force shaking her sketchbook to the floor. And then violence. A kick, sudden and brutal, sending her chair jolting forward, her body rattling from the shock of it. Gasps filled the classroom. A few students reached for their phones, thumbs trembling as they hit record. Amara's heart raced. Should she cry out? Should she resist? Or should she remain still, praying that stillness would somehow protect her? But the truth was written in the officer's eyes. There would be no protection. Every second stretched endlessly, each one carrying the weight of humiliation, of pain, of fear that this moment could spiral further. She had seen stories like this before, on the news, in headlines, in the voices of parents warning their children to be careful. And now she was living it. Just when the tension seemed unbearable, the door opened. Angela stepped inside. Her presence was like a storm, commanding, undeniable. But she wasn't just any mother walking into a school. Angela carried with her a strength hidden beneath her work clothes, a quiet power born from years of service, from connections few could ever imagine. And in that moment, the officer's authority began to crack. The room seemed to shrink, every pair of eyes fixed on what would happen next. The officer's grip tightened, her authority unraveling into desperation. Amara's world slowed to a crawl, the boot inches away, the sound of students holding their breath, the pounding of her own heart filling her ears. She could feel the weight of every injustice she had ever read about pressing down on her, crushing the air from her lungs. Her body trembled, not just from pain, but from the unbearable humiliation of being treated as less than human in front of her peers. And then the moment of reckoning. Angela's voice, calm yet sharp as a blade, cut through the chaos. Her presence wasn't just that of a mother, it carried the quiet authority of someone with power far greater than the officer could ever claim. Phones were raised higher now, recording every second. The officer's hand twitched, torn between holding on to her illusion of control and the realization that she had gone too far. Sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder. For Amara, the world seemed to hold its breath. Would this be the moment she finally broke free? Or the moment everything shattered beyond repair? When the dust finally settled in that classroom, the silence was almost unbearable. The officer who had tried to strip Amara of her dignity was no longer in control. Her shouts, once sharp and commanding, now sounded desperate and hollow as security escorted her away. But even as she was removed, the echoes of what she had done lingered in the air like a scar. Because humiliation doesn't just vanish when the abuser leaves the room, it lingers inside the victim. Replaying again and again, Amara sat at her desk, her small frame trembling, trying to steady her breathing. She had always been the quiet girl, the one who kept her head down, stayed out of trouble, and believed that if she didn't make noise, the world would leave her alone. But today proved otherwise. She hadn't been loud. She hadn't fought back. She had simply existed, and that had been enough for someone to decide she was less, to treat her body as an object they could control. Her mother's hand rested on her shoulder, firm yet gentle, a silent promise that she was safe now. But behind Angela's steady presence, Amara could see it, the flicker of pain in her mother's eyes, the heartbreak of knowing that her child had been forced to feel the weight of a centuries-old struggle before she was even old enough to fully understand it. News of the incident spread quickly. Students' phones had captured everything, the kick, the confrontation, the moment the truth unraveled. By the end of the day, the video had already left the walls of that classroom, making its way into conversations across the city. Some called it shocking, others called it unsurprising, because for every Amara, there were countless others whose stories never made it to a camera, never made it beyond the four walls of humiliation. For Amara, the impact was twofold. On the surface, there was the relief. Her mother had stood up for her. She had been protected in the end. But beneath that relief was something heavier, the realization that protection isn't always guaranteed, that in another classroom, in another moment, the story could have ended differently. And it often does. This incident became more than just a family's pain. It became a mirror held up to society. It showed how quickly power can be abused, how deeply racial prejudice is woven into everyday spaces, and how easily a child can become a target for no reason other than the color of her skin. It revealed the truth that injustice isn't always found in the streets or in headlines. It can be waiting in the very places meant to keep children safe. The story of Amara is not isolated. It is not unique, and that is the most haunting part. Because for every video that sparks outrage, there are countless untold moments happening quietly, moments of humiliation, of fear, of pain that never see the light of day. Amara's story forces us to ask, how many more will it take before change is more than just a word we repeat after each tragedy? As Amara walked out of that school with her mother, she didn't walk out the same. The quiet girl who once believed silence would protect her now understood that silence could never shield her from prejudice. But she also understood something else, that her voice mattered, that her story carried weight, and that her very existence was an act of resilience in a world that had tried to make her feel invisible. Her pain was undeniable, but so was her strength. And while this moment left scars, it also ignited something larger, a demand for accountability, for justice, for awareness. So as you hear her story, ask yourself, what role do you play in this cycle? Do you turn away, waiting for the next video, the next headline, the next name? Or do you lean in, speak up, and demand a world where children like Amara can sit in a classroom without fear? Because this isn't just her story, it's ours. And the question remains, how many more Amaras will it take before we finally say enough?